You're listening to the TJ Moore Podcast. Today's guest is Ken Hartley, joining us from Chattanooga, Tennessee. He's a keynote speaker, leadership coach, author of 10 books, and illusionist who helps leaders think differently, communicate clearly, and lead with greater impact. He was recently named by MSN Microsoft among the top 10 keynote speakers. He blends storytelling, behavioral insight, and unforgettable illusions to deliver high-energy presentations audiences remember and apply what they learn from him. So Ken, thank you for joining me for today's conversation.
A pleasure to be with you, TJ.
Now, you have a new book published titled Calling the Presidents, Leadership Wisdom from Every Commander-in-Chief, and it went to #1 in business leadership and biographies of presidents, and was also in the top 10 category of presidents and heads of states. So for 12 years, you traveled across the US, visiting every presidential home, museum, library, and grave, as well as other historical sites. And you also studied biographies, speeches, letters from the presidents. Was there a highlight memory from any of these trips that you want to share with everyone?
Well, the biggest surprise as far as the places I went to had to be the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library in Springfield. I did not expect it to be like it was. I thought it was going to be like almost every other presidential library, a chronological history. And it was very intentional in the design, to the point that when I got through the first show, I went, Disney's got to have their hand in this some way or another, because it was like I was at a show at Disney. And I asked them, I said, did Disney design this? And they said, no, Disney didn't design it. But the guy who did design it used to be a Disney Imagineer. And I went, okay. The shows are spectacular at the Lincoln Library. And the way it's laid out is extremely well thought out. It tells his story in a very compelling way. And I would even call it moving.
Was there any life lessons that you personally took from everything you read that you've been applying to your life?
The presidents that you don't necessarily care for throughout history, you can learn just as much from them as you can from the ones you do. Some of them teach you what not to do. Some of them give you instruction on what to do. And I think both lessons are extremely valuable.
Your grandfather was President Truman's electrician. Can you tell us a little bit about what you know of that?
Yes, Glenn Adams in Independence. And he ran a little electrical store in downtown Independence, and his home, which was on West White Oak, was 2 blocks from Delaware, which is where the Truman House is. They knew each other. He called him Glenn. And my mother, who was a student at Mizzou in Columbia, it was actually December 26th, 1946. She's back home for Christmas break, and she picks up the phone. Somebody answers. She said, yes, I'd like to see if I could get an appointment to see the president today for him to sign some Bibles. I'm a student at Mizzou. And he said, well, you got him. And so my mother went down there, and Harry Truman signed that Bible. I still have that Bible and others. And then my grandfather, about 3 months after my birthday, after I was born, he walked over to the Truman House with a little Gideon Bible and knocked on the door. Harry Truman answered and he said, Glenn, what can I do for you? He said, I just had a grandson, and would you mind signing this? He said, not a problem. Signed the Bible right there. I have that as well. So yes, a lot of history and independence with Harry Truman.
I bet that these signed Bibles are in your prized possession family heirloom section of your house, right?
They are. You can't see behind that board over there, but just a little bit down that hallway are some framed memorabilia from presidents, some that have written me letters through the years. And then Harry Truman, of course, the Bibles are there, and it is very treasured.
Have you seen The Hateful Eight?
I have seen The Hateful Eight.
I only bring that up because there's a whole running joke that's not revealed until the very end that Samuel L. Jackson's character is carrying a letter from Lincoln. And he sort of uses this to almost gain instant credibility or respect from people who wouldn't respect him otherwise. They all believe it because it's quite a convincing story the way he tells it. And it's not till the end that the audience realizes that he actually made the whole thing up.
I know there was a friend also who talks about the letter from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the I Have a Dream speech that he held onto his whole life.
Now, you've written that this is not a political book. It does not argue policy. It doesn't promote political parties. It's a leadership book that's built from history's most scrutinized real-world case studies. So was there a president who really surprised you the more you dug into their history that you didn't know about them before?
Absolutely. There were two of them, in fact. One is a hometown guy for me, James K. Polk. He was president number 11. He did something nobody up until that point had done. He said, I'm going to serve one term. I'm going to do four things, and then I'm going to leave. It was just unheard of that a politician would talk that way. He's the only Speaker of the House to actually be elected president, and he got elected. When he did four things. He accomplished all four, and then they said, you got to serve another term, and he went, nope, I'm done. And he walked away. And the other one would be Grover Cleveland, who is president number 22 and 24. And of course, until recently, he was the only one to serve two non-consecutive terms. But the most admirable thing about Grover Cleveland and the takeaway from him was his integrity. I would put his honesty on par with Abraham Lincoln. And I think this is where a lot of leaders kind of get sideways in that they equate honesty with and integrity with never making a mistake, which is not true. Honesty and integrity means when you make a mistake, you own it. He 100% owned his mistake. And he had an opportunity at one point from a political opponent. His party gave him dirt on his political opponent, James G. Blaine, and said, you want to buy these papers? Because James G. Blaine had been very cruel to him. And he said, absolutely, I want to buy the papers. So he bought them from the operatives, took the papers, and threw them in the fire. And then they looked at him and said, we can still release it. He said, by all means, do that as long as you have somebody else to run for the presidency on the Democratic ticket. Interestingly enough, when he was leaving the White House at the end of his 22nd term, and this is actually in a book right there on that shelf, there was a gentleman in the White House who recorded this in his memoirs. Frances, his wife, Grover Cleveland's wife, looked at the guy named Jerry and said, now, Jerry, I want you to remember where all the furniture is and where the decorations go for when we come back. And he thought, she meant, you're just going to come back and visit. And he said, so when are you planning on visiting? She said, we'll be back here 4 years from today.
Wow.
That's a presidential equivalent of Babe Ruth calling his home run. I mean, that's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, it's almost a premonition, So you mentioned the number 22, 24. So I've heard that you can actually name the president given any of the numbers 1 through 47. So I'm just going to give you a number that you haven't heard before, 16.
16. Oh, he's the one everybody knows the most. That's Abraham Lincoln. And his leadership strength was, of course, he was the great emancipator. But what most people don't know is if you read his speeches from the Lincoln-Douglas debates in the 1850s, 1858, when he was debating the diminutive Stephen Douglas, a lot of his views could be considered borderline racist. The strength of Lincoln was that he learned and he grew and he evolved in his beliefs to become the great emancipator. He didn't start that way, but he most definitely ended that way. And any leader knows that your worth is going to be tied to how much personal growth you pour into yourself so you actually have something to give to the people you're influencing.
You're almost like Nicolas Cage in the movie National Treasure. Okay. Now,
thank you, TJ. Yeah, I'd like to do that. That'd be a lot of fun if I could do that.
And I just rewatched it the other day, and I enjoyed it even more now than when I was growing up.
Yeah.
Does it ever bother you when you're watching history movies or one that's specifically about a president, now that you've done all this deep diving? Do they get things really wrong in these biopics?
I get asked this one all the time. Most people don't know. Number 20 is James A. Garfield. And most people had no clue who he was until Netflix released a thing called Death by Lightning. And it's a miniseries about James A. Garfield. It is wonderful entertainment. It is lousy history. The history of it is not good. It's based on a book called Destiny of the Republic by Candace Millard, which is sitting over here on the shelf. And that book is excellent. But they took a lot of liberties with it to create something that was entertaining. But it's always discouraging to me when people will argue and go, no, 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 no. This is what happened because I remember I saw this on the Netflix thing. And I'm going, yeah, that wasn't right. That wasn't right. Just a small thing. Like they had James Garfield interacting with the man who would eventually assassinate him 5, 6 times. In reality, he met him one time. He knew he was Charles Guiteau was the man's name. He knew he was very disturbed and told everybody, keep him away from me. And they never interacted again until he snuck up behind him at the train station in Washington.
This reminds me of when Neil deGrasse Tyson watches like space movies or, things that he's an expert in. There's no better place to go in history than letters that were written from one person to another. How did you get access to some of those? Did you go to the Library of Congress for some of these documents?
No, a lot of the libraries and the historical sites have them. That's what a presidential library is going to have. If it's a true library, has all of their papers. The very first presidential library, most people think it was Franklin D. Roosevelt. He was the first National Archives library, but the first presidential library was actually the 19th president, Rutherford B. Hayes, and his children had all his papers and said, we can't let these go to waste. They opened a library for him in 1917, and it's still there in Fremont, Ohio. Extraordinary library and probably the coolest presidential house I've ever seen. It's amazing. Any Ohio people listening, you want to go see that. Other things were found in diaries, like Rutherford B. Hayes. One of the reasons they did what they did is he had a diary he kept almost every day. He would write in it all the way through the Civil War when he was serving in the Congress. I mean, just all of governor, all of his stuff is there. Ronald Reagan had a diary every day that he was in office, and it's called the Reagan Diaries. You can get that. John Quincy Adams, the 6th president, had invaluable information in his diary that he kept since he was a child all the way through. And he lived a long, long life. He's the only president we verifiably know knew both George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. So I would read his writings. Ulysses S. Grant did his autobiography. Invaluable information there as well.
So when it comes to what scholars look for in value of historical verification, one of the things that you benefited from with all your research was that there are a lot of these diaries and documents that are in their own handwriting. They're a direct source. It's not something that was transcribed or translated 3 times,
True. I'm going to show you something. I haven't shown this for anybody else, but I'm going to do this for you, TJ. So the first iteration of the book.
So Ken is holding up right now the first sort of draft that he made of this book. And you can see the level of detail and the research that went into this binder.
It is 442 pages, completely sourced, annotated. But I realized when I first did this, and this was finished about a year and a half ago, I realized, man, Ken, you have written a great book that nobody is ever going to read. Nobody's going to want to wade through this thing. And so I decided, okay, the annotations are great. I wanted to make sure they were accurate, but it also made the book too long. So instead, I just did a bibliography at the end. If I quote somebody in there, I had to go verify that quote. And I found out, too, there were quite a few presidential quotes that are out on the internet that are not remotely accurate. And some of the presidential libraries actually thanked me. Thank you for asking. By the way, that quote's attributed to him all the time, and he never said it.
Yeah, it's like the game telephone. By the time that it's, 7 generations later from some of these presidents, we're not getting all the quotes right, for sure.
The thing that I looked for when I went to the presidential libraries is I was always searching for the gold. And the way I defined the gold was I wanted to find out something that was just completely fascinating that most people didn't know. What's something about this person that most people have no clue? And so every single president, I would dig and dig and dig. And sometimes it was looking for, I don't know, like a needle in a middle of a haystack that it's just almost impossible to find. But I found it with every one of them. There's something interesting about every single one of these presidents that is just little known. But when you hear it, you go, oh. So there's a section in every chapter called, that's interesting, which is what I hope people will say after they read it, go, that's interesting. I didn't know that. So in addition to the leadership side, the book has the interesting side of it as well. And For me, like I said, history, I do history and I do illusions and everything else for one overarching reason. And that is I'm a very curious person. Very, always have been. Asked too many questions as a kid, all of that. That was me. But I wanted to know, why is it that when I say names like Teddy Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln, we instantly know who they are. We know who George Washington is. But when I say Chester Arthur, Franklin Pierce, Millard Fillmore, they held the same office. At one point, they were the most important person in the country. But today, they're a trivia question that most people miss.
Even on Jeopardy, there's some people that they know sort of the key presidents, but they don't know, all 47 to this level. I think you would be classified now as an expert on presidential studies. Yes, these people were public figures, but they had personal lives. And that's something that takes a lot more imagination on the side of the public to realize like their life was more than just the 4 or 8 years that they were in the White House. Like I've been to Nixon's estate in Southern California, and that's a massive property. Like his life went on, beyond that role. So it is sort of a role that we put on a pedestal, but there's a bookend of their life that comes before and after what we see on the news or have read in a book.
Every president, it has their strength and they have their weakness, all of them. The Nixon one in Yorba Linda is one of my favorites because I love how it begins. Normally you go into a presidential library, okay, here they were as a baby, here's the chronological thing of their life. You walk into Nixon's library and the first room is, I shall resign the presidency as of noon tomorrow. And it's Watergate. I mean, it's like as if you walk into the library and they're going, okay, we know, we get it, we know. Let's just put it out there at the very beginning. I love that. The library was built around his boyhood home, which was owned by somebody else, and they were going to tear it down, and it was right next to an elementary school as well. So they bought the elementary school, they tore down the elementary school, built a brand new elementary school a couple of miles down, and then built the entire library around that boyhood home.
If you could have dinner tomorrow with any of these 47 presidents, who would you personally choose?
Well, Lincoln would be one because he was a great storyteller. And in that vein, probably Ronald Reagan too, because he told great stories. Ronald Reagan kept a small, so it turned into a big box, but it was a box of index cards. And every time he would get a new story, this before, laptops, computers, he would just write the story out on an index card and he would file it. And so at any given time, when you see him, he has an index card in his pocket that he can pull out and tell a story immediately. Or before a speech, you'd see him on a plane or just going through those index cards to try to find an appropriate, funny story to tell. So I love stories. I would want to have that with him, and then probably Grover Cleveland as well.
You had 2 run-ins with the Secret Service throughout your life. Can you just tell us? People have to know, what is that?
Yes. Yeah, I did. So when I was about 10 years old, I was visiting my grandparents. Walk around, there's the Truman House, just 2 blocks from their home. And so I just kind of started walking around looking at it. And it's this beautiful white Victorian design. And I walked around a corner and I thought, I want to look down the corner. I'm curious. And I got halfway down the corner and I heard, "Excuse me, son." I looked around, turn around, walk back here. And I could hear the voice. I couldn't see anybody. I walked back. He goes, "Look to your right." And there's a guy across the street at a house waving, calls me over there. And it was the Secret Service there to protect Mrs. Truman. "What are you doing over there?" I said, "I was just walking around." They said, "Well, you can't walk back there. You're not supposed to be there." I said, "That's okay." I told them a few things about Harry Truman that I knew. And I guess that impressed them. And they said, "You want to come inside and look at this?" I said, "Yeah." And there was all the cameras they had. They said, "We could see you walking here and all this. We're just protecting Mrs. Truman. We know you're not a danger, but you just don't need to go back there." I said, "Yes, sir." That was run-in number 1. Run-in number 2, I was an MC for a company called Get Motivated. They had all these big name speakers that were there. And one of them was Rudy Giuliani, who at that time was guarded by the Secret Service. And they sent me out halfway through the day as the MC. So one MC to me. And so I'm out there and they said, when Rudy Giuliani is done, Giuliani is finished, you run up on stage and you say, "Ladies and gentlemen, America's Mayor Rudolph Giuliani." And then you introduce the next person, who happened to be General Colin Powell. I'm sitting at the bottom of the stairs and you kind of conscious somebody's looking at you. You know, you get that feeling in Spokane, Washington. There's 10,000 people in this arena. And I realized they have not told the Secret Service there's a new MC coming out. And they told me to go running up on stage. And I'm going to get form tackled in front of 10,000 people. I'm getting nervous. I mean, starting to sweat. And the guy's looking at me, and I'm sitting right at the foot of the stairs going to the stage. He's staring at me, and I go, I'm the MC. And as I said that, he kind of narrowed his eyes and then did this.
Oh, God.
I'm going, oh, no. And so I don't know what I'm going to do. And Rudy Giuliani did the same speech every time. It was verbatim, word for word. I knew exactly where I'd seen him 4 times. I knew where he was going to land. He's getting done, and I stand up. Those guys move in front of me, and then I've got a mic on. I went, I'm the MC. I'm the MC. And they
go, oh, my God.
Go ahead. We're going on stage, and America's Mayor, Rudolph Giuliani. You know?
Yeah, by that time you were like,
right.
I'm a little bit terrified.
Yes. And what was funny is later that night we're at the hotel and all of the Secret Service guys were there in the bar. And I walked through there. They all went, hey, MC guy, glad to know you. And I went, yeah, thanks. I'm glad you know me too. They said, yeah, they forgot to tell us. They didn't tell us. It's not your fault, but it could have been a bad thing. They gave me a flag pin with the Secret Service emblem. And they said, if you'll wear that, you won't have a problem again. And I kept it.
Another book you've written is called God Wired. It was co-authored with Chris Rollins and was #1 in the category on Amazon in Christian leadership. And at 50, you changed careers after being a music pastor for 36 years. You worked in churches with congregations that were as small as 90 and as large as 13,000 people. And your dream was to become a keynote speaker. How did your background being a music pastor tie into your new career now as a professional speaker?
I would say the crossover would be being on a stage, that I developed a certain amount of comfortability and ease, if you will, of being on a stage, and some of them very big stages with a lot of people in front of me. I got to the point that it was so familiar that it didn't bother me anymore. And that was helpful. At first, never thought I would do anything else other than be a music pastor. And there were just some encounters with some different people that shifted that perspective. I kind of jumped and then kind of grew some wings on the way down. I don't recommend that for everybody, but that is a bit of what I did.
So one of these encounters that you had was actually a one-on-one meeting with Zig Ziglar, who is well known. He's almost legendary at this point as being one of the most influential motivational speakers and authors. He passed away in 2012. So can you just share your experience meeting him?
Yes, I was with a company called Get Motivated. I was one of the MCs for that. And in the process, they kind of frowned on the MCs interacting with the speakers. They would generally go, leave them alone. And Zig Ziglar was at every one of these things. And he's there with his daughter, Julie Ziglar Norman, who's a wonderful person. Zig, he was going down into his basement and he fell down the stairs and he hit his head. And when he hit his head, it took his short-term memory. He would tell you a story, and then a minute later, he would tell the same story. So Julie was on stage with him to kind of keep him on track. But again, I was kind of staying away. And Julie, knowing this about me, one day just said, Ken, would you like to come up to the hotel room and meet Daddy? And I went, yes. And what she didn't know is I was carrying around with me this copy of See You at the Top. And I'd just been waiting for the time that I was going to get to meet him because I wanted him to sign this. This is his classic. And so I'll show this on the camera right there, but there it is. He signed it to me. Little Bible verse there with it because that's Zig. In his confusion, he said, all right, Ken, now that you've written your first book, let me tell you what you need to do. And Julie goes, Daddy, that's your book. That's not his. He goes, oh, I'm sorry. He goes, I get confused sometimes. I just get a little confused. It's okay. And then about 5 minutes later, he circled back around to it again. And he said, now that you've written your first book, let me tell you what you do. You poured your heart and soul into this thing. So now you go out there and you get on that stage and you change lives because you got a message that's important. And that message is a fire inside you. And you let that fire burn out of you and you let it burn in other people too, son, because you're going to change lives with what you're going to do. I can tell life changers when I see them. You're a life changer. You're going to go out there. You're going to do it. You're going to make a difference. So you do that. And then you get to the back of the room and you sell the fire out of that book. And he was Zig Ziglar in all his glory. It was amazing.
That's incredible. With the short-term memory loss, it doesn't really matter because that truth is still within them. And it doesn't matter if it's the second time you're hearing it. It's still true. It's still authentically them. They're just trying to express themselves.
And that was the result of all that personal growth that was inside Zig Ziglar. He spoke from his heart. It didn't necessarily even have to go through his head because it was so inside him.
Dr. Reggie T has written this about you. I know that he's also a longtime friend going back. Ken is an outstanding keynote speaker and entertainer who truly knows how to connect with an audience. So what's something audiences don't know behind the scenes that goes into doing this level of speaking?
The preparation, honestly, the preparation. People think, well, speakers make how much money for an hour? It's not the hour. It's the hours and hours and hours of preparation you put into that moment in time. The greatest speakers, again, like Zig, who may seem extemporaneous in their content, like Les Brown, it just looks like it's off the cuff. It never is. They are just so well rehearsed and so familiar with their material that it just flows out of them. Being on the stage for a speaker represents maybe 7% of what I do. 93% has nothing to do with that stage. It's all behind the scenes preparation.
Is there any advice you have for someone who wants to make a change or a career turning point in their life, but they're too afraid to start?
You move forward despite being afraid, but I tell everybody, take calculated risks. Foolish risk is jumping out of an airplane with a parachute, having never done it before, with nobody to tell you how to do it. Every significant change I've ever made in my life, everything I've ever learned, has been through the influence of a mentor. I found somebody who was doing what I wanted to do, and then I enlisted their help. I did not ask for free. I offered to pay. I invested in myself to get that information, to learn how to do it and do it right.
So last night I was watching the interview that Michelle Obama did with Steven Spielberg, where they were going over Disclosure Day, the new movie coming out. And she asked him, do you still get nervous before arriving on set? He said, I feel all of the emotions that anyone would feel. And she's like, why is that? He said, because everything's a new project. Everything is a new story that you're telling. So 36 years of being a music pastor, what else connects now to what you're doing with keynote speaking?
I learned how to connect with the people. I learned how to know, are they with me or are they not with me? And this is kind of what inspired Godwired was, why don't these people listen? What is wrong with these people? They don't listen. I tell them and they say, you never told me that. They don't listen. The greatest day of revelation for me was when I realized the problem wasn't them. The problem was me. I had to learn how to intentionally connect. That one thing carried over into the speaking, because essentially what I'm doing from the stage is connecting with an audience. Some of the people are in there going, I got to go to this conference again this year. It's always so boring. I don't want to go to this, blah, blah, blah. That's the person I want to reach. I want to pull them in to go, not only was this interesting, but I actually learned something actionable that I can take away with me for the rest of my life. That's a win. I speak to associations. So you have the Association of County Officers, and then you're speaking to the Association of Emergency Management. You can't do the same thing for both of them. If you have a cookie cutter thing and that you are force feeding them to try to make it fit, it's not going to work. You have to be willing to adapt to your environments.
There's another book that you've written called Leadership Illusions, 21 things people believe about leadership that are not true. And something major that we have in common is actually illusions, magic tricks, stage performing. When you're on stage performing illusions, is there anyone that is your favorite to do?
The favorite one that I do is one called a Zany Blaney levitation. I don't get to do it very often. You got to fly it there, and there's just a lot to go through to get the equipment there. That's my favorite one to do, though, because you get an audience member and you levitate them and you pass a hoop over them. It's a great illusion. I'd say the one I do the most is the torn and restored newspaper.
That's a classic.
It is a classic. It's my go-to. Did it today.
I saw a clip of the one where you draw a bowling ball on a large pad, and then an actual bowling ball comes out of it. When I was a kid, because I got all the magazines for catalogs of magic tricks, and Magic Smith sold that trick, and they were selling it. This is probably in the year 2000. They were selling that trick for $800. So I don't know what all comes with it, but I will always remember seeing those things in the catalog, and then I'll see videos of those things performed on national television. I've also done some collaborations with Masters of Illusion, and then I've been to Penn and Teller's show. I've seen David Copperfield, and I wanted to ask you about going to the Magic Castle, since we've both been there and your involvement with that.
Yeah, I was a member of the Magic Castle. I was introduced to it by a guy named Doug Malloy. I've done some of Doug's effects. Doug has worked for years with a guy named Chris Angel, and he introduced me at the Magic Castle, and I became a member there. And I think it's the greatest place to see the greatest magicians in the world. And then what Penn and Teller do on their Foolish show, I just think is so wonderful. The bowling ball thing that you mentioned was invented by a very creative guy named Kevin James.
Yeah.
And Kevin tours with a show called The Illusionist, and they tour all over the United States. So if you ever get a chance to see The Illusionist, he is the inventor.
I think he was also on America's Got Talent.
He did. He divided the person in half. Yeah, he did that. That was it went viral. Years ago, David Copperfield did an illusion, and he did it in his shows for years, where he had a piece of paper, the paper ball floated up his arm and down, and then he folded it up into a rose, and he'd light it on fire, and it turned into a real rose. That's Kevin James.
We also have a mutual connection with the magician Reza.
Yeah.
And then I saw his entire sort of journey to now he has his own stage that he performs. I don't know. He said 200 shows a year in Branson, Missouri.
Amazing.
And then he actually has traveled all over. He's done tours as well, but that's sort of his mainstay area now. And then I've also done Magic Series videos with him for the company Magic Makers a couple times over the years.
The very first sub trunk that I purchased, and if you don't know what the sub trunk is, that was a trick that Harry Houdini did with his wife, Bess. Bess would tie him up, put him inside this wooden crate. She would stand on top of the crate, raise a curtain up, and then say 1, 2, and then on the third one, Harry Houdini was there, and he would drop the curtain, and Bess was inside the box tied up. I got that effect, and the original box I had was a wooden crate, and then I upgraded to something different. But that original box of mine went to Reza. He bought it from me. That was my first connection with him. And what a fantastic illusionist he's become.
So we both have a lot of life experience with illusion and performing. How does this relate to leadership and that topic that you teach?
What I began to realize, TJ, was there are a lot of people in leadership positions that had faulty beliefs about what leadership really was. When you go see a magician, you expect to be fooled, and it's fun. It's entertaining. You walk out there and go, wow, that really fooled me. That was great. But in life, if you walk through life believing an illusion to be reality, it is going to absolutely crash you. And so I realized if I could tell people these are the truths and encourage them not to live for the illusion, but to live for that truth in leadership, it could revolutionize how they look at it. And that was the whole motivation for Leadership Illusions.
So there's a recommendation I want to share that was written about you. This one is from James M. He says, Ken is able to take big idea concepts and communicate them in simple, easy to understand, but impossible to forget ways. The lessons stay with you. More importantly, the belief that you can implement the lessons stay with you. So, connected to your Calling the President's book, I wanted to ask you about an online course you've created called Leader Pass. Can you talk about, is this related to the book or is this a standalone series?
Leader Pass is a company, and I wanted to do a supplemental course on the president. So it's not a rehash. The Calling the President's book is a standalone, but as I said earlier in this talk, I had so much information that I realized I could give a lot more, plus show some of the memorabilia I have, plus give more interesting stories, but really break down the leadership lessons and some specific steps you could use to improve that one area of your leadership. And when I pitched that idea, Leader Pass was all in. Yeah, let's do this thing. They were extraordinary. They're based in Atlanta. They're extraordinary to work with and true professionals. They created a great studio just for this shoot. It was pretty amazing what they came up with. And then I was able to give some leadership lessons that I personally believe are transformative, that if you go through all of them and apply them, plus there are workbooks for each section you can download yourself, or you can download it and fill in the blank. You don't have to print it out. But it's great information that I believe will help every single person up-level their leadership journey. There are over 60 videos that are in this because some of them, like Abraham Lincoln, I had to do 5 videos on him. You can't sum him up in one video. Most of the videos, and by the way, they're bite-sized. They're not 30-minute videos. They're about anywhere from, I think the smallest one was 4 minutes, and one of Lincoln's was up to 11 minutes.
And the workbooks make it more interactive. So it's not just a passive experience. It's actually something that they can look at your research more in depth.
So there is a little bit of crossover, but you could always go back to the book for reference. But if you didn't have the book and took nothing but the course, you would still be okay.
You say on the homepage that every US president faced defining moments that tested their leadership, such as war, national division, economic crisis, relentless political opposition. So the presidency is a lot more than politics. It is one of the clearest real world laboratories of leadership ever recorded. And everyone who is part of Leader Pass for this can also explore the presidents or the moments that interest them the most and follow their journey across American history. So what else can people expect to take away once they join this course on Leader Pass?
Well, they're going to get some in-depth leadership principles. And in the workbooks, those are the questions that get you to think deeper into it. Every single person is either in the middle of a storm in their life, they're heading into a storm, or on their way just out of a recent one. And that is the truth. So studying this material is preparation for real life leadership.
So clients or companies can book you as a speaker on your website, which is kenhartley.com. And also to buy Ken's latest book, go to callingthepresidents.com for the physical copy of the book. And for the Kindle edition and also the audiobook that was read by Ken himself, go to Amazon and just search Calling the Presidents. It'll pop right up. Also, it's easy to connect with Ken on Instagram and LinkedIn. Just search Ken Hartley. And for those who want to join your course on Leader Pass, what's the best way for them to search that or find it?
The link to that Leader Pass is on my site. But if you go to Leader Pass and search presidents, just put in presidents, it's the only president's course there, and it'll come up. Going back to not just the presidents, but leadership in general, history is screaming at us to be wise, to learn from it. And it was George Santayana who said that those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. I don't want to be somebody that keeps repeating the same mistakes. I wanted to learn. I wanted to grow. And it is my passion in life as I speak to people, as I travel, and I've done that a lot. My good friend Delta and I did 170,000 miles last year alone. It is my goal to spread this leadership message all over, which is this one thing. True leadership is service. And the more we serve, the more we build influence. The more we build influence, the more leadership we have. And the more leadership we have, the more people we can serve.
Ken, thank you so much for joining me for today's episode.
TJ, it was an honor to be with you. Wish you nothing but the best. I'm so glad we connected on LinkedIn, and I look forward to hearing not just this episode, but the other ones that you do as well.
To hear more experts share their story, subscribe to the TJ Moore Podcast on YouTube and follow this show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts to listen anywhere you go. Like and comment on this video if you found today's conversation valuable, and share this episode with someone in your life. I'll see you next week.